Hi.
Greetings. In the chapter on the great crowd in the Proclaimer's book, on page 163, we have following up who the great crowd are and your change of mind about this in the days of Rutherford's 1930s mostly. Uh, this subhead is Sheep at the Right Hand of Christ, and they talk about the difference in their interpretation between what they in Christendom used to believe and what they currently believe since the days of J.F. Rutherford.
Hmm.
So we're going to read it first, a whole page here, and then make some comments that all resound within me anyway, to say ultimately that you could have saved yourselves millions of, well, you could have saved yourself 140 years to begin with, and millions of lives of people who've committed their lives to this false doctrine just by going to the scholars who actually know the meaning of the word parousia. Because
Hmm.
all of this is about your view of the parousia, the invisible presence. So let's read it first and you'll see what we mean.
Sheep at the right hand of Christ. A truly significant step in understanding Jehovah's purpose, centered around Jesus' parable of the sheep and goats at Matthew 25, verses 31 to 46. In that parable, Jesus said, "When the Son of Man arrives in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit down on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left." As the parable goes on to show, the sheep are those who help Christian brothers.
Christ brothers.
Oh yeah, okay. To help Christ's brothers, even seeking to bring them relief when they are persecuted and in prison.
It had long been thought that this parable applied during the millennial era, in the time of restitution, and that the final judgment referred to in the parable was the one that would take place at the end of the millennium. But in 1923, reasons for another view of matters were set forth by J.F. Rutherford, the president of the Watchtower Society, in an enlightening discourse in Los Angeles, California. This was published later that year in the October 15th issue of the Watchtower. When discussing the time that this prophetic parable would be fulfilled, the article showed that Jesus included it as part of his response to a request for the sign of his presence and of the conclusion of the system of things. The article explained why the brothers, and brothers here is in quotation marks again, referred to in the parable could not be the Jews of the gospel age, nor humans who show faith during the millennial period of testing and judgment. Notice that phrase, the millennial period of testing and judgment, but must be those who are heirs with Christ of the heavenly kingdom. Thus why the parable's fulfillment must be at a time when some of Christ's joint heirs are still in the flesh. And they ask us to look at Hebrews 2:10 and 11 about Christ having to be like his brothers or brethren.
The experience of those anointed brothers of Christ, when they endeavored to witness to the clergy and to the common people associated with the churches of Christendom, also indicated that the prophecy embodied in Jesus' parable was already being fulfilled. How so? The reaction of many of the clergy and prominent members of their churches was hostile. No refreshing cup of water, either literally or figuratively. Instead, some of these instigated mobs to tear clothing from the brothers and beat them, or they demanded that officials imprison them. In contrast, many humble church members gladly received the kingdom message, offering refreshment to those who brought it, and did what they could to help them, even when the anointed ones were imprisoned for the sake of the good news. As far as the Bible students could see, those whom Jesus spoke of as the sheep were still in the churches of Christendom. These, they reasoned, were people who did not claimed to be consecrated to the Lord, but did have great respect for Jesus Christ and for his people. Yet, could they remain in the churches?
So I guess we've got to start with this. The whole page really is based on the idea that there are anointed brothers of Christ, and that there are non-anointed people who also will become Christians.
Yeah, that's an assumption.
This, of course, is your assumption. It's your gospel, and it's especially the gospel of J.F. Rutherford.
Yeah.
It's what he created, in which you have imbibed and have never re-inspected or revisited. It's an assumption, and like we have said many times in the past, building assumptions upon assumptions is only compounding the error.
Yeah. So I think it really does go back to the idea that Matthew 25:31-46, when it describes the return of Christ, that it's a parable.
Yeah.
They start with that, and they say it all the way through. It's a parable, it's a parable, it's a parable, but it doesn't call it a parable in the account, right?
Yeah, my take on it would be that it's only questionably a parable. It's actually a prediction. Christ is talking about when he's coming, this is what's going to happen. Built into it is the metaphor of the sheep and the goats.
Yeah.
But it's not a parable in the sense, or it's certainly not an allegory where you have to decode it and you need someone's help to decode it.
He uses sheep and goats as just an illustration of the two in the flock.
But here's a general rule that we all should obey and think about all the time, which is you never derive basic teachings from parables or from predictions, for that matter. You derive your basic teachings from the plain pronouncements of the apostles who preached the good news.
Outright statements.
Your good news from the beginning has been based upon, and many of your other basic teachings, such as your Babylon the Great doctrine, based upon not just parables or what you think of as a prediction, like the faithful and discreet slave question. It's a question. It's not even a parable.
Yeah.
But it's based on an illustration of the steward. What does the steward have the responsibility to do? But certainly never get your basic doctrines from apocalyptic literature like the book of Revelation. And here you've got several doctrines, the Babylon doctrine, the 144,000 doctrine, the great crowd doctrine. You've got them all from an apocalyptic book. This is something Christendom never makes the mistake of doing, but Christians do. So we're not saying that nobody but witnesses do this. Seventh-day Adventists do it with their doctrine of the mark of the beast that separates them from all other people. Lots of people do it, but trained Bible scholars never do it. And those trained Bible scholars would have saved you the 140 years of misery that Jehovah's Witnesses have gone through, false predictions, just by redefining for you parousia, which never means in the Bible invisible presence. It means presence, yes, but not invisible presence. It's like a royal presence, anything but invisible.
I think when at the top of page 164 they quote Matthew 25:31-46. I think if you look at it, all the stuff that leads up to the separation of sheep and goats, he arrives in his glory with his angels. He sits down on a glorious throne, and nations are gathered to him. With the Watchtower's theology, all of that has to be spiritualized.
Yep.
None of it is literal. None of it is observed by anyone. Does that make sense in just the plain reading of the scripture? How does he arrive in glory if he stays in heaven, and with his angels if they stay where they are too?
Yeah, glory has a definite meaning in the Bible, and it's not invisible presence.
Yeah.
So glory that would be seen by the eyes of men means something that they will see with their literal eyes. And of course you realize when you think about it why they've had this consistent doctrine of the invisible presence, not just since 1879, the founding of the Watchtower, but for years before that. And it's because of time disappointments, one after another.
Yeah.
It's even in the margin here, by the way, the title that's in the margin, Time of Fulfillment of the Parable of the Sheep and Goats. Their interpretation of this is based on several false prophecies that Rutherford had been party to. So by the time he's doing this in 1923, we've had about 9 years of disappointments about time prophecies, and now he's got to recast everything that they thought before in antagonism or hostility to what Russell had taught and what Christendom had taught consistently for, well, 18 or 1900 years about the coming of Christ, that every eye will see him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you get to the part where they talk about the brothers in the middle paragraph on page 164. They seem to present it as if there's really only two options. One is that the brothers must be literal Jews. That is an option, by the way, that is considered by many Christians. But the other one is that they are humans who show faith during the millennial period of testing and judgment. This is their peculiar doctrine.
Yeah.
Another error that's been compounded.
Yeah, it's not based on a scripture here. They just say it as if, and that's the way you think, that that's a period of testing and judgment. But nowhere does it say that.
Well, surely you realize, and if you don't, we should just repeat it again, that that doctrine was inherited from Russell, and he got it from Nelson Barber. The idea that all the billions that have never heard the truth, the present truth that Barber and Russell and Rutherford them were teaching, have to have a chance to hear that present truth, which means they must come back and be tested during the millennium. So this idea is unique to you guys.
Yeah. So even the last sentence in that, just before they mention Hebrews 2, when they say, those who are heirs with Christ of the heavenly kingdom, thus why the parable's fulfillment must be at a time when some of Christ's anointed heirs are still in the flesh. This is all based on the fact that they are time-centered. Unlike Christendom, where if you're a believer, if you're a Christian, you're spirit anointed.
And you're a joint heir.
Yeah. So there's no there's no concentration on time. With the Watchtower, everything is very time sensitive. They are centered around where are we in the frame of time. So they're counting down to Armageddon, and they're also counting down the number to be fulfilled, 144,000.
Yeah.
So because of your peculiar centered position on those things, you don't see what everyone else sees.
So that takes us to the second last paragraph about the hostility of the clergy and some lay people. I would be hostile too if you a discredited false prophet were sending people out into my flock. If I were a pastor, you're sending them to talk to my flock to deceive them in a way that you have been deceived, and the people who died before you, who've died in the false hope that 1914 would be the end, or 1920 would be the end, now 25. I would be hostile. I might not take it out on you by instigating riots or doing any of the aggressive things you see here, but this hostility is deserved. Really, you're not humble. That you talk about. You talk about people in the churches. Some of them were humble enough to receive our message.
Well, because they just agreed with you. I really think you might as well just put disagreed. They were hostile. They disagreed. To most witnesses, that's hostility. You're not accepting what I'm saying, and I'm right.
And it's persecution.
So then it's persecution, and then it's hostility. So I think it's just a generalization here. Anyways, they don't say who. They don't say how many. They just say many. And when you generalize, you're going to find something somewhere, sometime.
I don't doubt there were people who overreacted and were even violent. And certainly in Germany that was the case. And other places in war-torn Europe during the Second World War, that was certainly the case. But these generalizations are just not warranted. I've never met, by the way, I've never met a nasty clergyman. I met one Baptist clergyman once who said that he would not welcome JWs into his home, but that's about as far as hostility went.
Yeah, and I have met many ministers because I was a church secretary at one point and met lots of them. And I don't remember ever meeting a hostile clergyman or, someone who was, talking about with anger about people who weren't Christians
or weren't part of his group,
weren't part of his church. They just didn't come across that way at all. They were always very interested in people coming to faith.
But even if that were not true, I would still have the fact that I had read the books of these clergy of Christendom who lived at the very same time as Russell and Rutherford.
Yeah.
And you never get the same spirit from their books that you get from Rutherford.
Most of them don't even mention the witnesses, the Bible students. They're not.
They're not a consideration.
They're not on the radar. They're not
Yeah.
thinking about them. Witnesses think everybody's thinking about them and ill thinking of them.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times you're not thought of at all.
That's a problem.
It's nobody's even concerned about you.
But the truth is that hostility breeds hostility. So if you're going to be nasty to people, as Rutherford is in virtually every chapter of his writings, if you're going to be nasty to everybody out there, you can expect some nastiness in return.
Yeah, that's true too.
So, no, people who received your message in the 1930s should have known better, because by then your false prophecies were on record. Everybody else knew about them, and if you didn't, that's on you.
Mm-hmm.
So what's our link?
We're linking to a video that you did. I think it's called Parousia. What does it mean?
Yeah, that's just a study, just a whole bunch of quotes from scholars who actually know what the word parousia means.
Mm-hmm.
There's no excuse for us not to know. So we've put it on the website, and we've also linked, we're going to put on your screen a link to the Kingdom playlist, which is, I don't know what it is now, maybe 100 or so videos.
Mm-hmm.
But we know the sensitivity of the witnesses who claim that they're only people preaching the kingdom, which is just a total fallacy. And so if you look on this playlist, you'll find lots of samples of Christians talking about the kingdom in an intelligent way.
They're
not in this propagandistic way that you do.
Yeah, they're not watching the clock like we did as witnesses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
See you next time.